Andrew Jackson, the seventh President of the United States, remains one of the most controversial and significant figures in American history. Born on March 15, 1767, in the Waxhaws region along the border of North and South Carolina. Jackson came from humble beginnings. His early life was marked by hardship. He was orphaned during the American Revolution, growing up in poverty and facing significant personal losses. Despite these challenges, Jackson rose to prominence through a combination of military success, political savvy, and a populist appeal that reshaped the American political landscape. Jackson's early life was defined by adversity. His father died before he was born, and his mother passed away when he was just 14. He and his brothers were left to fend for themselves in a turbulent time. Jackson developed a fierce independence which would characterize his future endeavors. He worked as a schoolteacher and studied law, eventually becoming a lawyer in Tennessee. His legal career paved the way for his entry into politics. Jackson's military career began during the War of 1812, when he was appointed as a major general in the Tennessee militia. His leadership during the war, particularly his victory in the Battle of New Orleans in 1815, made him a national hero. The battle, which occurred after the Treaty of Ghent had been signed, but before word had reached the combatants, was a decisive American victory. Jackson's reputation as a tough and decisive leader earned him widespread popularity, and he became known as Old Hickory for his toughness. Jackson's military success catapulted him into politics. He was elected to the U.S. Senate from Tennessee in 1823, but soon resigned, choosing to run for president. His appeal was rooted in his reputation as a self-made man and his promise to represent the common people. He positioned himself as a champion of democracy against what he perceived as an elite, aristocratic ruling class. In the 1824 presidential election, Jackson won a plurality of the popular vote but did not secure an outright majority in the Electoral College. The election was decided by the House of Representatives, where Henry Clay, who had finished fourth, threw his support behind John Quincy Adams. In what Jackson called a corrupt bargain, Adams was elected president, and Clay became his Secretary of State. Jackson's supporters were outraged, and he ran again in 1828. Jackson's victory in 1828 was a landslide, and his presidency marked a turning point in American politics. His election was seen as a victory for the common man and the expansion of suffrage, as voting rights were extended to all white men, not just property owners. Jackson's populist appeal resonated with rural and frontier Americans, and he positioned himself as a fierce opponent of the entrenched political establishment. One of Jackson's first and most significant actions as president was to implement the spoils system, a practice of rewarding political supporters with government positions. This approach was intended to democratize government, but also led to widespread patronage and corruption. Jackson's presidency was marked by several key issues, most notably his stance on the National Bank. He was deeply suspicious of the Bank of the United States, which he believed was an institution that favored the wealthy elite and had too much power over the nation's economy. In 1832, Jackson vetoed the recharter of the bank, a move that solidified his populist credentials but also contributed to economic instability. He withdrew federal deposits from the bank and placed them in state-chartered banks, leading to a series of financial crises, including the Panic of 1837, which occurred just after his presidency ended. Another major issue during Jackson's time in office was the Indian Removal Act of 1830. Jackson believed that the expansion of American territory required the removal of Native American tribes from their ancestral lands in the southeastern United States. The act led to the forced relocation of tens of thousands of Native Americans, most famously the Cherokee, who were made to march west along the Trail of Tears. Thousands of Native Americans died during the relocation, and Jackson's policy remains one of the darkest chapters of his presidency. Jackson also dealt with issues of states' rights and federal authority. The nullification crisis of 1832 to 1833, for example, arose when South Carolina, led by John C. Calhoun, declared that it could nullify federal tariffs it found unconstitutional. Jackson fiercely opposed this idea, arguing that the Union must be preserved at all costs. He threatened to send federal troops to South Carolina, which ultimately backed down, and the crisis was diffused. Andrew Jackson's tenure is marked by both admiration and criticism. On one hand, he is celebrated for his populist approach to governance, his expansion of democracy, and his determination to protect the Union during the nullification crisis. His presidency reshaped the role of the executive branch and introduced a more direct form of democracy. Jackson's election is often seen as a turning point in American politics, ushering in the era of the common man. On the other hand, Jackson's legacy is also marred by his policies toward Native Americans, his support for slavery, and his authoritarian tendencies. His decision to forcibly remove Native Americans from their lands, his role in the institution of slavery, and his frequent use of veto power have led many to criticize his presidency as one that favored power and expansion at the expense of justice and human rights. His personal attitudes toward Native Americans and African Americans were deeply rooted in the racial prejudices of his time. Jackson's actions regarding the National Bank, his role in the Panic of 1837, and his harsh treatment of political rivals have also led to debates about the long-term impact of his presidency on the American economy and political system. Nevertheless, his influence on the American political landscape is undeniable, and he remains a figure who evokes strong opinions. After leaving office in 1837, Jackson retired to his plantation, the Hermitage, in Tennessee, where he lived until his death on June 8, 1845. He died at the age of 78, having spent the final years of his life reflecting on his career and legacy. His funeral was a grand affair, attended by many prominent figures of the time, including future President James K. Polk. In the years following his death, Jackson's legacy became a subject of intense debate. While many admired his leadership and populist ideals, others denounced his policies, particularly his treatment of Native Americans and his commitment to slavery. Despite the controversies, Jackson remains one of the most iconic figures in American history. His image still appears on the $20 bill, a reminder of his enduring influence on the nation. In conclusion, Andrew Jackson was a complex and polarizing figure whose presidency played a central role in shaping the trajectory of the United States. His populist appeal, military achievements, and steadfast commitment to his beliefs left a lasting mark on American political culture, even as his controversial policies continue to provoke debate today.